two, three,
Hey everyone, welcome to this video which was recorded in the past, and today I don't know what day it is, but we've just released In the Style of Dan Wilson on DC Music School. Dan, thank you so much for being here, for doing this with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Dan's a machine, he can do it all. He knows it all.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd ask you some little questions about music and all that stuff.
Sure.
Obviously in the lesson series we go in depth about his playing style, but I was very interested about what you said about growing up in the church community and everything, because nowadays I think when a lot of people want to learn jazz, especially outside of North America or maybe parts of Europe, they go to music school, which is a completely different culture. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons I've become so disillusioned with music school, because I think the absence of the knowledge of the culture is very apparent, and I would like to see that change. And it starts with some really in-depth study and some cultural exchange. That's really the best kind, because when I learned different styles of music, the cultural exchange was a lot more valuable than the notes. You know, I went to Cuba some years back, and I sat across the table from a guy who's a percussionist, and I had him explain to me the each rhythm, you know, and all the drum parts, and I was just soaking it up, and that was more of a real experience than just learning kind of concepts just for concept's sake.
And one thing that I found really, really fascinating, again, on that topic, is like people, you go to music, you learn these concepts, these scales, these modes.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were just telling me, oh, it's just vocabulary, or it's just the church, and you didn't even know like the names of your notes. Can you tell me about how that was when you're growing up, like that experience in the church?
Yeah, I you know, everybody played. You know, all of my friends played. It was just kind of a thing that everybody did. And now looking back on it, you know, at the time when you're in it, you don't realize how valuable it might be.
Yeah.
But now when I look back on it, I'm like, whoa, man, what a privilege that was to be able to experience that. Like everybody I knew played music. You know, we all talked about music. You know, we were just kids. You know, you did kid stuff, but you know, when it came time to play music, like sometimes we just play all day. We would have a summer camp every I think June or July, and you know, you could go to all these different stations, and some of the elders would sit down with you and actually teach you how to play an instrument. And so then I would go home and just be like, Dad, can you buy me a guitar? And he was like, yeah, all right, you know. And from then on, I was just like obsessed with the instrument. I remember that first year at summer camp, I was like 13, and 13 going on 14, and the very first tune that I learned was a real simple church song, and one of the elders let me borrow his guitar, and I was in my dorm room the entire week with that guitar, just trying to figure out, you know, how to make these sounds, and I just became consumed with it, and that's lasted for the past 25 years.
And it seems like, as you said in the lesson series, you'll have to buy it. But you were talking about how your ears developed, like you were able to hear all these complex chord progressions, because in that gospel music you had a lot of these relatively sophisticated chord progressions and all that.
Sure.
Without even knowing the theory.
Yeah. And that's to this day, you know, a lot of the gospel music of that time, but not even in the church that I was playing in, because it was very insular, you know, and we played a lot of more traditional stuff, but still with some complex chord progressions. But just on gospel radio, you know, you had, that was like the '90s, so you had groups like John P. Key, New Life, Community Choir. You had Fred Hammond was big. Who else? The Winans brothers was big. And they were coming out of that traditional gospel music, but they were influenced by people like Stevie Wonder, all the funk that came before, and even the music of the day, even the hip hop and the R&B. So, you know, that there's some changes in that music, and so just hearing that over and over, your ears become kind of accustomed to that. And it's when I look back on it now, how old am I? 38. With my 38-year-old ears, I'm like, man, those are some great changes. You know, just like being able to know the theory behind them now, it's just like, man, somebody was just hearing that at that point, and it's incredible.
So it seems, as an improvising musician, a lot of this was muscle memory of all the sounds that you heard, versus when you go to music school, all right, over C minor, you play this scale, that scale.
Yeah. I just don't. I just feel like that, you know, the chord scale relationship thing is kind of devoid of context.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not learning it in the context of a song, you know, it really doesn't help you. In my opinion, you know, a lot of the concepts that I put into place to this day, I learned them in a song.
Yeah.
Like I remember the first time I heard like inverted diminished. It was in the tune "Spring Is Here." The first chord is diminished major, you know, and I was like, oh man, how do you use that sound? And then I started hearing it all over the place. I started hearing it in the first chord in Misty. Da, da, da. I was like, oh, it's diminished major. And then I learned You've Changed. You've changed. First chord, diminished major. You know? So, you know, concepts like that, you tend to remember them in greater detail because they're attached to an experience.
Yeah.
And that's what I would like to see more music students have, just to have all the concepts that they're learning tied to an experience. And in order to kind of facilitate that, it's important that you're involved in the culture.
I was during the pandemic, I was stuck in Asia, where obviously they don't have that culture there. So what kind of advice would you give to people from something so far removed from the culture?
Well, one of the encouraging things that I've seen in Asia is an appreciation for the culture, particularly in Japan.
Oh yeah,
there's a huge appreciation, and even in we did a tour with Christian McBride in Japan, and we ended up in South Korea.
Yeah.
And South Korea was, as the kids say, lit.
Yeah.
I mean, like that was, they were one of the best audiences on that whole tour.
안녕하세요.
Yeah, right.
한국 친구들 사랑해요.
Speaks every language. It's crazy. But you know, yeah, just an appreciation. And now nowadays everybody's interconnected through social media. You know, you can develop relationships with people in that culture. And I encourage people to travel if you can.
Yeah, definitely.
And really experience the culture. Just one of the good things for me of just being able to travel as a musician is to just go places where I'm in the minority. And I'm from the United States, so I'm used to being the minority. So, but you just kind of learn how to be the only one in the room, and that increases your awareness, because a lot of you can't just go on autopilot. So when you experience culture in that way, it causes you to be a little more in tune.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. And I noticed in the lesson series you were talking about how important also not the culture, but also understanding the history, and that's something that I really love as well. So can you just talk about that? How you feel that history is tied to the music and all that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It really, when you learn these concepts, I think it's important to understand why they're being put into place, and a lot of times that's tied to the history. Um, you know, a lot of times, like you may not understand why Thelonious Monk would choose this rhythm, or choose this particular harmony, but that may have something to do with something he experienced in North Carolina. So just knowing that he was from there and knowing something about the culture of the people of that place in that time period will cause you to have a deeper understanding. Like for me, growing up in the church, the way I hear organ music to this day, when I hear organ music, it causes me to have a certain feeling that I view as sacred. Just because of my experience.
Yeah.
Just like I was reading something about Brazilian soccer players and how the everybody's like, oh man, Brazilian people are just naturally good at soccer, but it has everything to do with the environment in which they learn. There was I think the article said something about them being them learning soccer in a confined space. So when they graduated into an actual soccer field, they were that much better at getting around defenders because they learned in that confined space. But without knowing that particular part of the culture, I think we just, it's easier for us to come to these conclusions like, oh, they're just naturally good. But no, it has something to do with their upbringing, and you have to dig a little deeper.
Well, actually, when you talk about that, a lot of my favorite jazz players, like you said, they came from also a church background. So like, and hearing all this music from a young age, you don't really need to know that it's this scale or that. You just hear that stuff.
Absolutely. It's important. I don't want to downplay the importance of developing your understanding of music and learning theory, but if these ear training things that we learn early on are not put into place, I think it kind of puts you at a disadvantage.
Definitely.
And I can tell sometimes just by looking at somebody if they grew up in church, like they have like certain mannerisms, and definitely hearing them, the two notes, you're like, oh yeah, I know where you came from, and that's a beautiful thing to be connected to that.
Can we talk about something a little bit nerdy for the guitar players out there?
Sure.
We talked about this in the lesson series, which you should buy, and I think you have a course on your site, like on right hand techniques. Is that it?
Yes.
Can I ask you what kind of pick you use?
Yeah. So I'm going between three different kinds. So there's the Fender Heavy. I just like the kind of the bite you get from that, and then these this kind of Fender Heavies. It's slightly softer sound. It's called a Tortuga. And then there's a Fender Medium on the recommendation of George Benson. He came out to hear us when I was playing Joey D's band in Phoenix, and he had one of his picks with him. He said, yeah, young fella, you ought to use this pick. It'll help with your articulation. And I tried to play with it, and I sounded awful. I was like, oh, okay, well, you must have some magic hands, But then I put it away, and I was like, there's no way. There's only one George Benson. And it's not me. And but then I started I picked it up again, and I started playing with medium picks, and I started kind of get the hang of it. I was like, oh, it's a different sound, So I'm still experimenting with that.
Well, on that topic, what kind of strings are you using? Flat wound or round wound, or do you know?
Flat wounds. Flat wounds. I'm using the D'Addario Chromes. I've always been like terrible at like knowing my gear. I've never been a gearhead. I think that comes from being in church and playing on subpar instruments.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of play on whatever is available.
Then you talk about this right hand, which I guess a lot of people are calling George Benson picking him, but you said that in the African American church environment, this is pretty much how all of them are playing.
Pretty much everybody that I've come into contact with, and I think it has a lot to do with being able to sustain rhythm for long periods of time without getting tired.
Could then maybe the term George Benson thing be inaccurate? Is this something that was been around for a while, or do you have any idea? I know I read interviews. There are different stories about how George Benson came about, so I don't even know what's true.
Well, I mean, I would I still call it George Benson picking because I think he's taking it to
he popularized it.
Yeah, and he I think he took it to the highest degree. Just playing wise, I think for me he's the best that has ever touched the instrument. I mean, especially when I hear those bootlegs of him in the mid '70s, is frightening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way he's able to hang at those tempos and still be musical, still phrase, still leave space, and then just hit you with just blinding accuracy. I haven't heard anything like that since.
Definitely.
Mm.
Well, guys, thank you so much. We're gonna decide what we're gonna eat tonight, and thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, man.
Cool.
Man.